welcome back to the seminar. We now have the third discussion today, the panel discussion, and may I introduce Anu Tuukkanen, who will moderate the discussion. Anu is working at the Amnesty International, the Finland section, as a, or you could say, you know best your title there.
Yes, I work as an expert on human rights defenders and civil society, so very fitting people we have here now. So, welcome to you all. It's wonderful to have you here, and we have already heard from Matti, and we have heard from Shankar, and we also have introduced you earlier, so we'll not be doing that again. But Iiris and Tom, you are new to the panel, so it would be great to hear a bit from you. So maybe before we start talking about this issue we have at hand, which is protection and support for environmental defenders, security issues, challenges and opportunities. That's our topic today. So would you please, Tom, introduce yourself shortly? We already heard about your, from Phyllis, about what your organization does. You work for the Center for Justice, Governance and Environmental Action. But if you would briefly tell us a few words about your role and your work in the organization.
Thank you so much. So at Center for Justice, Governance and Environmental Action, I'm the programs manager. So I am in charge of running all the organization's programs, the projects, and coordinating all the other staff within the office. Yeah, so that is my portfolio in Center for Justice. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Iiris, you are an activist at the Extinction Rebellion and Elokapina in Finnish. You're also an artist. So can you tell us a little bit on how you combine your art and your activism?
Yes, my name is Iiris, and how do I combine art and activism? It's been a struggle lately because I have found a crisis in making art. I think lots of time is put into what is not so necessary in these times of crisis. I do study dance, but then a lot of time goes into like direct action and maybe educating myself on how to effectively act right now. But at the moment, I'm actually found a way that inspires me and is like, I find empowering. We are working on a project at Ylioppilasteatteri, which will take place in June and July. And we are now inviting people from different environmental movements and the, what is the AY-liike? The
labor movement.
Yes, this trade union, yeah. And also some political parties to discuss together how to like make some joint action to stop the Helsinki city politics that are actually just accelerating the crisis and not taking action. So I think it's like art through discussion and like how to make theater from that. Yeah.
Thank you. So artivism is your bread and butter. Great. So at this session, we'll first discuss the challenges environmental and indigenous defenders face. And then we'll look at what kind of support and protection is available for you, what tools you have, and what you need. And lastly, I would like to hear your concrete recommendations to Finland, first of all, and maybe other actors as well, maybe EU, businesses, whatever you want to bring forward. So let's start the first round. Johanna Sumuvuori, State Secretary, already kind of took my burden because I was going to say about the same things that she already did. But very shortly, environmental and indigenous land defenders are often targeted for their work, and they face retaliation because they expose human rights violations by corporate actors and other actors, states. And we can, for instance, the example of that, more than half of the human rights defenders killed last year were people doing this work. And it's been kind of documented by different NGOs, Frontline Defenders, Global Witness, and so on. There are also, for instance, examples of killings in Kenya of environmental defenders, and also kind of abuse in Nepal. The retaliation also takes other forms, not only killings and physical violence. There's also smear campaigns, verbal or physical intimidation and violence, surveillance, online, offline, criminalization of activists, destruction of property, discrimination in employment, for instance, and other things. And another thing also is shrinking space for civil society. That's maybe something that is more topical for Finland at this context, but restrictions to freedom of assembly, association, speech, so that's very topical also, I believe, in your environments. So we have a very broad range here to talk about. I would like to ask you all, how would you describe the security landscape for defenders in your country? And what specific challenges do indigenous and environmental defenders face? And you can also tell some examples. You can tell about your own experience, your NGO's experience, or the community's experience. And I hope you also comment on the state of civic space in your country. For instance, the restrictions on freedom of assembly and so on. Maybe we start with Shankar. If you tell about the situation in Nepal.
Well, thank you very much. This is also the crucial areas that how we can make sure that the human rights defenders or community rights defenders, they are safe and they are secure while they are defending the rights of the communities, or they are defending the land rights and also defending the environment rights, right? The first challenge what we have seen is the recognition of human rights defenders. That is because the police and the government, even to the human rights organizations who are working in a national level, they are reluctant to recognize the indigenous people's right defender as human rights defenders, right? So that's why, if that means what it means in legally, that means that they can be put in custody, jeopardizing the peace and security in the society in the first place. So there can be the charge of fake cases. So we're sitting in a capital, and then most of the time we go to the community as well. But when we go to the community, then we also face kinds of direct and indirect intimidation as a lawyer, right? We know that how to fight against it, but you can imagine that those community people, when they are not aware about these kinds of right, then what kinds of situation they face it. 2 weeks ago, one woman, she was just saying that it was about the transmission line case. The transmission line, the laws clearly says that you cannot take above the houses in human settlement, which is crystal clear in the law. So she was saying that, why don't you avoid my house? Because this transmission line is supposed to go from the safe place. She was not against that project. She was arrested. She was tortured and hospitalized for almost 3-4 days, right? So, and then what we did at the same time, we called to some of the organizations. It's not nice to take their name. But they said that this is not a human rights defenders, right? So we have like two kinds of human rights defenders working in the community. One, we provide identity as a human rights defenders, right? So that's why they can show their identity card whenever they go. That's also the one strategy we applied. Another, we work very closely with the national human rights institutions, so NSRI, if there is something going to be happen. Because we have to be careful that how we can prevent the human rights violation. Not like there is a human rights violation and you can take a remedial part, right? So that's why it's our duty. So that's why we work very closely with the national human rights institutions. The another very, very important the organizations or important our partners like KIOS and then like UN and then ILO. But I often like to prefer to like the organizations like KIOS and CJGEA and Amnesty International, because the ILO and UN is very bureaucratic. Right? So I'm not criticizing, but that's the technicality that we have to do that one. That cannot provide their service in timely manner. But the special rapporteurs are there, something different, we are using them. And the third one, for preventing human rights violation, code of conduct is very important for human rights defenders. So that we have a kind of code of conduct, develop a code of conduct that how they can support to the community, right? And also we seriously take our responsibilities to those indigenous leaders who are actually defending their rights in the community, especially land rights and environment rights. Right, so that's the one. And this last course, if maybe if there is a human rights violation, then we can use the court as well, and national human rights institutions and international human rights bodies. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Tom, you'll be next. Yeah. So, about the security situation. And Phyllis already told in the previous discussion a bit about the situation in Kenya, but maybe you can also elaborate a bit on civic space.
Okay. Thank you so much. So for the Kenyan situation, I would say that the security landscape for the land and environment defenders is not that good, because defenders mostly work at great personal risk and the risk of their families. You will find that in Kenya, in 2015, Kenya voted against the United Nations General Assembly resolution on the protection of human rights defenders. This already underlines the fact that Kenya is not ready to protect land and environment defenders. In 2014, Kenya amended the laws to the Public Order Act through what we call the Security Laws Amendment Act. And the 2010 Constitution for Kenya is a very progressive constitution. It provided laws that could protect defenders and also allow for freedom of assembly and rights to picket and freedom of association. But with the introduction of the Security Laws Act 2015, you find that most of these clauses were amended, and this in a way curtailed the freedoms that LEDs could enjoy in line of their duty. And the civic space has been shrinking. The 2020 report by Global Witness ranks Kenya as one of the most deadliest countries for the land and environment defenders to exist in. And so the security landscape is generally not that conducive for the land and environment defenders. Some of the challenges that defenders face include security risks and threats. The most notable one is criminalization of defenders, whereby you find defenders who rise to challenge human rights violations or environmental rights violations within their communities are criminalized and accused falsely through bringing of fabricated charges and through judicial harassment. Just as Phyllis had mentioned, we have many defenders who have been criminalized and judicially harassed because of standing up for their community land rights and environmental rights. A good example is the LED that is working in Kwale against an industrial establishment that is recycling oil to produce other products. So this lady rose to challenge the environmental rights violations that were being meted upon the community by this industry. And she met a lot of retaliation from both the industrial establishment and the state itself, because you will find that in the management ranks of this industry, there are very powerful people who have good connections within government. And so they have used this to their advantage to bring very many false charges against this lady. And as we speak, she faces up to 6 criminal cases at the courts, in the courts of Kenya. And this has been extended also to some of her family members. And I think this is a tactic that is being used to try and dissuade her from continuing to pursue such causes that she was pursuing before. And this has also been extended also to the other community members that she was working closely with to try and raise some of these issues within the community. So that is one of the security issues. Another one is defenders face very huge challenge in terms of inadequate resources. You will find that most of the funders and the international organization, the donors, tend to channel their funds towards conservation projects. And this leaves the defenders, those who specifically work on land and environmental rights, hanging in between. So this inadequacy of resources to continue with their work effectively means that they cannot grow, or even they cannot challenge some of these situations that they are facing. And so there is need to at least look into the issues of funding, and donors and international organizations should kind of do some review and perhaps also include the issues of land and environmental rights more into their scope of work and funding areas. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. You both brought up kind of very important things. One of the environmental indigenous defenders not maybe kind of seen as human rights defenders, and especially if they are kind of working on very grassroots level, so that's even more difficult. And also the funding issue, this maybe affects also that. So security, your opportunities or possibilities of working depend a lot on the recognition issue. So you should be recognized as human rights defenders, which is already kind of understood as a legitimate role. So thank you very much for that. Maybe we can continue then to Finland, where we face very maybe different issues. I mean, some of the same, but also very different. So Matti and Iiris, so the security situation in Finland is definitely different, but many activists still face harassment, face threats, especially online. People have been kind of silenced. They don't want to work there because they get so much hate speech against them. So what kinds of challenges activists and defenders face in Finland? And maybe if you can also touch upon the civic space thing and what you think about freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, how it affects your work.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, first I want to note that Extinction Rebellion and Elokapina in Finland operates from a really privileged position, as it consists of white people and belonging to the majority group in Finland, like the valtaväestö I'm speaking. But even us who are going to the streets and disturbing the business as usual, the protests are treated as safety issue by the police. And this is already like a challenge and even a threat to the right to demonstrate and the right to speak up. And also like the notion or the knowledge and experience we have of the police sympathizing the far-right people or the far-right messages is like must be taken into consideration, and that like because we know that the far-right being present when we are protesting, it already excludes so many people from the movement because it's so threatening to them, and while police not actually doing anything for their disturbance. In fact, we have experience of the police like telling a far-right person how to harass us even more. And that's like, that is happening in Finland, where people do trust the officials and the police. The protests are poorly protected, as that mentions, and like we have experience of cars passing through a block and there were police standing by and nothing was done. Yeah, I think it's also a threat that we lack resources in Elokapina and this movement to like make cases about the inaction by police and like really talk about this, because we're so occupied with like even like making up the protests and all that other work. So that would need more resources. Yeah, and I wanna like say thanks to other civil movements that are very on the left, like in Helsinki, and people in Finland might know Varisverkosto and the anti-fascist movement, who last summer they actually protected us more maybe than some of the officials when the far right was there, because they have knowledge like how the far right people operate and where and who they are and like what to do. So civils are like protecting each other, I think.
Yeah, so what to add? I think our perspective is a bit different, that in general we use only those legal tools that are given to us. So we defend nature on the paper, so but still we get like indirect attacks to stop doing that. And it's our association is nationwide. We have 150 associations all over the country, and we have regional and local associations. And those who work in the local associations, they are usually volunteers, and they have, of course, civil jobs and works too. And I think it's more common to try to affect the defenders through their work or social media, stuff like that. They get a lot of threats to they will lose their jobs or affect all their children through that. So that kind of threat we have, and we have one or two direct attacks, like this one mining company wants to get criminal prosecutors for our members like 10 years ago, and this year we have like very direct attacks in social media in this Sipo area. That was really it was about housing rights, house building rights. So not a big thing, but they really can like build up hate towards our association. But there's still that I think this kind of discussion has to happen in Finland too. That Finland usually think that it's really, we are so small country, not lots of people, so everything is calm, but it happens under the surface, I think, more. But yeah, I think that's one point.
Yes, thank you. So you kind of refer to a little bit to a kind of a chilling effect that the resistance has to activists. Like you said, not everybody wants to go there to demonstrate because they are afraid of the far-right groups. Actually, Amnesty Finland just gave a statement to the Finnish Universal Periodic Report, the UN Human Rights Council process, and we stated that maybe for instance, the charges against Elokapina activists, the disproportionate charges they got last year when they were demonstrating on the government palace. So that might be something that would create a chilling effect and maybe arresting people also for no good reason. So that's something we see here, and I think that's something very globally happens. You also, I think, maybe somehow internally hinted to gendered or racialized harassment that might be combined there. I would like to ask you all, from the kind of intersectional perspective, because kind of you're working with very marginalized peoples, and also you're working with communities, and your kind of partners, and so are also kind of, maybe you're hinting to that, saying that racialized or people, for instance, are not very eager to come to your demonstrations because they are afraid of retaliation. So would you like to comment on that perspective? How does it kind of, how do you see that in your work? An intersectional perspective to human rights defenders, women, sexual, gendered minorities, racialized minorities.
Well, I can say one thing. We in Elokapina, we actually got like a wake-up call for this, more like to look at our own actions from more intersectional perspective by like a Sami activist and another activist in Finland, and it was really like precious comments to us, and it opened up like new possibilities to do like anti-racist work in our community or in the movement, like how to make this more inclusive. And yeah, so that's like one thing where like every time now we've tried to make like protocols that we follow when we are organizing an event, that everyone is aware of their privileges and how to like operate in the shared space so that it would be safer as far as we can take it. And we have these support people always, like in roles when we are protesting. There are like police contacts and law support people who are like observing what the police does. And before all the protests, it's now like a rule that the people must go up to the police and be like, you know, we are actually following how you treat the demonstrators, because I think like there is a lot of racism in the police institution and like in the structures we live in here in Finland. So, and they are not like opened up. Nobody is educating the police of how you what you're doing and what like informs your actions. So like it's, I don't know, we're desperately like trying to do what we can to like tell them that you should be aware of it. And I don't know what would be the tools to like increase like the knowledge of the police, the knowledge of racism and other forms of oppression in the police, because it's such a like a system that is so far away somehow, and who makes those laws and. Yeah.
Maybe okay. So Tom and Shankar, do you want to comment? I mean, we almost had an all-male panel here, and then fortunately we got Iiris here. So maybe the gender perspective. How about the women defenders in your countries?
So, for Kenya, we work very closely with communities, and in these communities, women are the most supportive in our causes, and you will find that they are always at the forefront when we advocate for issues, especially for on environmental rights and land rights, because women are the ones who are most affected, women and children, by some of these violations that these industries and development structures and so on met on them when they are being established. So women are always very vocal in the struggles, but also we work closely with the different agencies, government agencies, especially like the police nowadays. Also in Kenya, it's a requirement that when you want to protest or to picket or to just conduct a peaceful assembly or a march, you have to notify the police. But again, in Kenya, this law has kind of been curtailed, because nowadays it's not very easy to get permission from these authorities to either march or picket, because they always find a way to throw away your request. Like recently, I remember when we wanted to conduct to picket in the community, we put a request to them, but then this they turned down, giving reasons that there were security issues within the coast, and so our demonstrations could not continue. But again, you find that in our constitution, we are assured of the right to picket under Article 37, and so you find that these laws are conflicting, and the constitution is the supreme law of the land, but the police some kind of have their way to deny you some of these rights. So I would say that we continue to engage them, especially in the forums that we always have, to view some of these initiatives that we undertake as not being always against the law or against development, but as a progressive way for upholding the citizens' rights, and also developing the civic space within the Kenyan nation. Yeah.
Thank you. Shankar.
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, that there is no recognition for human rights defenders, but at the same time, we are facing the challenge. The collective rights are also not recognized as a human rights in national arena. That also impacting largely contributing to the human rights violations, right? The third one is, but very important things, how indigenous women are, their rights are being respected, or if there is their rights is violated, how that has been taken care of. In first place, indigenous women are not legally recognized in Nepal. That has a severe impact in many areas. Okay, let me give you the one example. It's about the national parks. The national parks are, most of the national parks in Nepal established in indigenous traditional homeland. And the women are the guardian and custodian of natures. And also they have responsibility to take care of their family. And most of the women, men, they go outside to work because they were displaced from their lands. And it's very difficult for livelihood subsistence. There is no choice for the women. They have to enter into the forest. I remember that last year Amnesty International came up with a very good report that one woman was giving testimony. This is our land. We go to collect the forest, the forest production, non-timber forest productions, vegetables or whatever. Then entering our land, in our own land, how that action becomes a crime. That was the powerful statement that was mentioned in the Amnesty International report, right? And the national park guards, they treat indigenous women so, badly. Sexual harassment and rapes and misbehave, ill treatments, that is routinely basis. We went there to study, and then in our study team, we have one friends, colleagues, who is female colleagues, and then she interviewed with victims, right? And what the victims, they told that, because they face that kinds of sexual harassments routinely, on daily basis, and they don't complain. Why? Because nothing happens. There's no point to complain against the army, against the security forces, right? So, and also that they told that how the situation can be changed. There is one possibility. If the forest guards are, they appointed from our community, who knows us, maybe these kinds of harassment would be stopped, right? So the national parks in Nepal, that is, the security is given to the army. So the army, once a year, they change. Whenever they go there, that they badly treated to the indigenous women, right? So these kinds of situation are there. But importantly, what we do is very few organizations, human rights organizations, bring these kinds of issues in their report. So it is very important to prepare the human rights report that reflects the collective rights violation and violations of indigenous women's right, right? So that's the important thing, I guess, important thing that we have to think right at the moment. And then the impunity. So there is so there was one case, the woman was attacked by army personnel. He wanted to, that was the case of attempt to rape. She opposed that one, and then that army personnel hit her so badly. Now she is almost paralyzed, and then she could not walk. And then how much compensation was given? The compensation was, it was like 10 kilo rice, 5 kilo potatoes, and 2 kilo dals. So you can imagine that what kinds of situations there, right? This report has been published by BuzzFeed, the international, and also this has been the report. We published about that report also, right? So that's why I rightly pointed out that when we talk about the human rights violation in general, we forget about those kinds of things which are very important, right?
Thank you all. I think we have to move forward to a bit to the tools and the support mechanisms you may have in place. But just a short kind of, there are very important things you raised. One which seems to be common to all is kind of the actions of law enforcement troops, both maybe in Finland, also in Kenya, also those protecting the or providing the security for the national parks maybe is not unproblematic. In Nepal, what we heard. So that's one very common thing, and the intersectional approach, very important. And what Tom, you said about families, that's also a very key, and that also connects to women being defenders and needing to kind of take care maybe of the families more than male human rights defenders, maybe more easily doing that. So that's already a very good things we have discussed. I was maybe going to ask you about SLAPs or strategic lawsuits against public participation, but I think you touched upon that already. So maybe we just note that these happen. So tools and mechanisms. So there are different tools and mechanisms to support supporting and protecting defenders. And I would like to raise now one. There is the EU Human Rights Defenders Guidelines and Finland's own guidelines, which the State Secretary already mentioned in her speech. And you have already talked about UN special procedures and national protection mechanisms are in place. There are regional networks. You have already mentioned NGOs kind of giving some support. So maybe if you kind of summarize very briefly, what do you think, Tom and Shankar, would be the most important tools that are available to you, and what do you think, how to make them even better?
I go first?
Yes, you go first. You have the mic.
Yeah, so for us in the Kenyan situation, we have different tools that we leverage to protect our defenders. One is the courts. This is in the 2010 Constitution, the Kenyan Constitution 2010. The Environment and Lands Court was introduced, and this court has given the land and environment defenders the opportunity to litigate some of the environmental rights violations and land rights violations issues within their communities. And so far so good. We can say that it's doing a much better job, even though the litigation process is a bit long. But then at the end of the day, we have that option to go to court to challenge some of these issues. The second one is the international organizations, such as the UN procedures and other funding organizations that work closely with the land and environment defenders to protect them and provide security for them in cases where they are at risk. We've partnered closely with international organizations such as civil rights defenders and frontline defenders in protecting some of the LEDs that we work with closely. The third one is the networks that land and environment defenders create. So through the partnership of KIOS, Center for Justice has managed to establish a national network for the land and environment defenders, which has brought together the land and environment defenders community to under one umbrella, where they can advocate for land and environmental rights issues as a united front. This in a way also legitimizes their work and also provides a sense of security around what they do, as opposed to when a defender is working in isolation. So those are some of the tools that we've leveraged so far to protect our defenders. Yeah.
Shankar, go on.
Yeah, lately we have been dealing lots of cases relating to the development aggression, and where not only the national level actors are involved, but some international financial institutions also involved, right? Maybe it's good opportunity to mention about that one case that was supported by the Finland government. It was in Nepal to establish the waste management project. It was a grant from Finland government. So the people, they also agree first about the project because they were told that they're going to build the hospital and the schools, and that's why. But later they discovered they are going to build a dumping site, bringing the garbage from the 4 major cities in the eastern part. So there was a huge conflict between the project and the communities. And the government, the local government was in the mood of deploying the security forces already. They deployed for 2 times, and so it was almost the border of India and Nepal. So the area was very sensitive, right? So the issue came to our office, and we went there to talk with the community, and the situation was so tense. And we talked to the government authority. They said that even we will, if it deems necessary, we will open the fire. That's what the government position. So what we have to do that one, I mean, I'm just indicating that not only the available tools or mechanisms, maybe we have to explore in this situation. So the strategy is very important that I want to flag on, right? So we approached to the Finland embassy, telling about the situation. It was so good that the ambassador was very positive. And then we had a meeting, and then sent some expert for independent study. The report was very comprehensive, and there was a series of violations and that not respected the human rights. And that was consortium project. There were other European countries also involved. So the project was stopped. So everything was fine, right? So that's why maybe these kinds of situation where international actors or international communities are involved in development activities, maybe we have to approach them. That's also the one of the things, right? What we are doing in the previous discussion, we discussed a lot about the free, prior, and informed consent. So that right has been enshrined in various international human rights instruments, and also there are guidelines as well. Let's say, for an example, World Bank and ADBs and EIVs, they also have safeguard policies we can use as a tool, that one. And also the court, as a practicing lawyer, in our experience, I don't really prefer in the first place to take the litigation or that sort of things, right? Because there are so many challenges. I understand about that one. I cannot disclose in here, right? But the better thing is maybe also these kinds of international human rights instruments and human rights mechanisms, right? And like special procedures, including the business and human rights, right? There is a business and human rights forum in UN, also we can approach about it. And also we can bring the complaint to the safeguard mechanisms of the financial institutions. And also that I would like to point out that maybe it is important to have a wider networking with like a kiosk and Amnesty International, who can support, right, in a timely manner, and then they have a capacity to produce like credible human rights report that can be used in this situation.
Yes. Thanks. Now we have already kind of past our time, but I would like to have a very short last round with you with the recommendations. But first, kind of, we have seen here there are different tools ranging from the UN mechanisms to very, very practical things like what you do in your demonstrations with Elokapina, like you have the roles and you are trying to make the space as safe as possible. So there's a whole range of things you can do. Now we have a wonderful opportunity to address the government of Finland here, because Rauno is representing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and and I hope he has a pen, because now I'm going to ask you to give your recommendations. So very shortly, I mean, you can touch upon very kind of broad things like legislative processes, like, for instance, the EU Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive, or you can go to a very practical side. What would be your recommendations to Finland, especially EU through that, and if you want, to other actors, like human rights organizations, for instance?
Thank you. First, I would say, like, join the battle, really. Like, recognizing a right to healthy environment is great, but it's like nowhere near enough. I think, like, isn't that the obvious recognition? It should be made a law that no one can violate. So, like, recognizing who is doing what that makes this not take place. Like, people even living here in Helsinki, where things are going well, I don't feel like it's a healthy environment or safe for people. So I can, like, only imagine what is happening in the environments, like, elsewhere. So recognizing what the structures are that are maintaining the system, and, like, joining the battles. I've lived in Palestine, and now I just want to shortly comment on that. I've seen these videos that are really terrible, where straight violence is put on indigenous Palestinians, where Israeli settlers are taking the homes. Like, why is this happening still? We have these roles of peacekeepers in war areas. I don't know what they do, but why don't we have roles or people, like, located in the places where the environment is violated and homes are taken from people? Is it because the states are part of this colonialism? Or, like, maybe we need the privileged structures or privileged people to be there observing what is happening and how the environment is, like, violated and people's lives, maybe. So something like that. This observation done locally should be also made public, and, like, more media coverage should be, like, people should be aware of what is happening and what colonialism means in the Sami land. Like, the mainstream doesn't know anything. I don't know enough about it, and I'm trying to put time. So it's, like, really hard for the majority of people to know. Yeah, what does it mean to join the battle if the aim should be that activism is not needed? Like, I don't know if that's the target at the moment. Are the institutions only making it more safe or more possible to be an activist? Like, I think that's a problem. We should get rid of the need for activism, and the structure should be there battling against. And what are the tools for that? Maybe a role of a peacekeeper telling that you cannot take someone's home.
Shortly, a couple of easy things would be that secure the access to justice in any cases that have environmental impact. So there's still corner cases that we have to fight for it, and it always raises the questions: should we appeal? And all the communities can be seen as a harm-making that we are making the appeals. And I think one would be I would always talking about the EU, but the EU's environmental criminal directive should be implemented to how the Commission proposed it. It would be like lift up the environment criminal crimes to the same level as different crimes do in Finland, because nowadays we just think about it as something leaks or somebody dumps something somewhere, and usually it's by somebody tries to get something like they don't want to pay it, so we should lift the bar for criminal crimes a little bit more. So that would be the easy cases to start with.
Thanks. Tom and Shankar.
Okay, thank you so much for being here, first of all, to come and listen to us. In the case of Kenya, I would say I had, you mentioned that Finland is in the Human Rights Council. Yes? Yeah, so one of the things that Finland can do for us is that you can help monitor closely the human rights situation of the land and environment defenders in our country, so that we help raise these issues of insecurity against the LEDs at the highest top organs of the UN. This, I think, would go a long way in helping to protect and secure these frontline defenders that work to save the planet. Secondly, we would like to see more partnerships, especially from the Finnish government, on projects that are geared towards protecting the environment and also enhancing human rights, especially those that are being implemented directly by the land and environment defender organizations and the human rights organizations. The third one now, we would like to see again the Finnish government refrain from funding some of these development projects that degrade the environment, and fund more projects that would actually conserve our environment back at home. On businesses, we would like to see more. This might not directly be to the Finland side, but we would like to see more engagements between the corporates and the LED community, in that we would like to see these people have more discussions regularly to try and discuss some of these issues that come up, or the conflicts that arise between the land and environment defenders and the businesses. For example, what we are doing now, we'll be holding a forum on business and human rights, whereby we've partnered with both UNEP and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, just to bring together corporates and environment defenders who work on extractive industries, to come and have discussions and forge way forward on how to address some of these issues that lead to conflicts between businesses and human rights. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank to the Finland government this morning and now in the session that I present here. I have some specific expectations, or not the recommendation, right? Because the Finland government and Finland, it's very good to know that Finland government has a clear policy towards defending the human right defenders, and also to the environmental justice. It has also a strategic paper and in the cooperation and the development of Nepal, which is, I have seen that more comprehensive, and that also touch upon the exclusion issue of indigenous peoples, women, and other sections of the societies in Nepal. That is very good. I have to really, I think that when I read about those papers, I was invited in the discussion meeting by the embassy, probably kiosk coordinated for that one. And I also, but at the same time, when I looked about that paper, maybe a little bit more specific focus should be given to the indigenous peoples, because when I go through the whole paper, it mentions about that one, but for the implementation part, there are some provisions that is needed to substantiate that's the policy in reality. And there are some projects which is about the hydro project. Finland is involved in, and that projects were being built. The hydro projects are being built in indigenous territories. I didn't see any complaint, or I haven't, received any information. But I know about that project is going on. And I'm sure that the policies that what we have been discussing here, that is not reflected in the project. Maybe it's one area that the Finland government can think of. And the last one, this morning also in the deliberation, we heard that Finland is a member of Human Rights Council. At the same time, Nepal is also the member of the Human Rights Council. So as being the member of the Human Rights Council, maybe the Finland has more space to encourage Nepal government to respect the human rights of indigenous peoples. And for that regard, what I see that KIOS and the indigenous peoples of Nepal, like organizations like my organizations and the Finland government already can work in what you call in concert, right? In harmony, that to substantiate the human rights that has been respected, the collective rights of indigenous peoples is respected, the land rights, what we are talking about, the rights over natural resources of indigenous peoples. One thing that I would like to mention, that when indigenous peoples talks about the land rights, that we have to understand, we are talking about the connectedness and coexistence and collectiveness. So it's not only that we're talking about that land belongs to the indigenous peoples. That means, yes, it belongs to the indigenous peoples, but it can be benefited to all sections of the society. Maybe that one I would like to highlight here. So that's, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have gone over time, but thank you for your very important views. I just want to say maybe 3 words to end. So we have to learn, we have to recognize the land and environmental indigenous defenders, and we have to cooperate. And thank you very much for this discussion.
Thank you.